Starting to wind down, and the semester is going to end soon, but we still have a final exam, and we still have a final lab quiz. So I think we got four more chapters to do before we get to the final exam. Most people did pretty good on the last lab because it was relatively easy. Some people had problems with the geologic time scale. Don't forget what an era is and what a period is and an eon. Go over the geologic time scale before you take the final exam. Know the eons, know the eras, know the periods. And also watch all the videos, especially for those who are doing well. Just keep doing the same thing. But for those who aren't, you need to watch these videos. Last time we left off talking about Mesozoic mammals, and mammals did not dominate the planet until the Cenozoic Era, which is from 65 million years ago till now, though they did appear during the Mesozoic. Next thing we're going to talk about is the 4 different kinds of mammals, and you need to know the difference between these 4 types. We have the multiturbiculates, which no longer exist. They died out 40 million years ago in the Cenozoic Era. We got the monotremes, the marsupials, and the placentals. There are 4 kinds of mammals. Mammals belong to phylum Chordata, as do all vertebrates, and class Mammalia. They are mammals. First type of mammal we're going to talk about is the most primitive, and it's a type of mammal that no longer exists, and it's called a multituberculate. Let's take a look and see what these look like. Multiturbiculates. It's a shame they're not around, but they died out about 40 million years ago. And you can see what they look like here. This is a typical multituberculate. Here's another one. Here's another one. They were rodent-like, but they're not rodents, because rodents are placental mammals, but they look like rodents. This particular one has a prehensile tail, and so we'll talk a lot about prehensile tails. Prehensile tails are long tails with strong muscles in them, and they are used by mammals that live in the trees, which are arboreal. Arboreal mammals live in the trees. They were anything from mice-sized to squirrel-sized. They are different than modern-day mammals in that they laid eggs, or they gave birth to very immature young, one of the two. Another difference is they have this very long tooth in the bottom jaw, massive. It's a type of molar tooth. And unfortunately, they don't exist anymore. Second type of mammal that you need to know about are the monotremes. I'll spell it for you. Monotremes. At the moment, there's only 2 types of monotremes alive today. They're the most primitive of all living mammals. And the 2 types of monotremes that exist today include the duckbill platypus, which looks like this, and the spiny anteater, which looks like that. You should know those 2 mammals are monotremes. Once again, don't forget they lay eggs. They have relatively small brains, and in the past there were hundreds of different types of monotremes, but there's only 2 left now. Third type of mammal you need to know about are called the marsupials. Marsupials. These were much more successful in surviving till today than the other 2 types of mammals I just talked about. And you should know that things like the kangaroo, the koala bear, this is called a wombat. There's a koala bear. These are all marsupials. The Tasmanian devil, not the cartoon character. Which looks like this is it's a carnivore that lives only on the island of Tasmania in Australia, is a marsupial. And there are extinct forms that lived up into the 1930s, like the Tasmanian tiger, which no longer exists. Once in a while you hear somebody say that they saw one, and they're still searching to see if they can find one, but the last one died in captivity. Marsupials are different than placentals. Placental mammals were placentals. Why? Because, and most mammals are placentals. Your dogs, your cats, your deer, bears, lions, wolves, any mammal that you probably have heard of is going to be a placental mammal, with the exception of the opossum, which is also marsupial. And marsupial mammals, the mother carries the immature young in a pouch, and there's no placenta, so there's no food source. So while the baby is inside the pouch, it's going to feed on its mother the little milk teats inside the pouch. Let's take a look at the possum. The only marsupial that's still alive in North America is the opossum. Marsupials used to be a lot more common, but by and large, around the world, they've been replaced by the placentals. There used to be all kinds of different marsupials living, for example, in North America, South America, Europe, and Asia, and they got wiped out by the placentals, which leads us to the question as to why. Well, Darwin's theory of evolution tells us why. The placentals must have had some advantage over the marsupials. And that advantage for placentals is a placenta. A placenta, for example, when you're in your mother's womb, is a food source that the baby feeds on, and so the baby can grow to much more developed and mature state within a placental mother's womb. And that also, even though the mother is encumbered by a lot, she can't do all the things that she could do without being pregnant. The mother is still able to carry out most of her daily activities and not be encumbered too much. Whereas for marsupials, they have to carry so many little babies in this pouch for such a long time, they can easily be hunted down. And that's what happened. If you think about it, in modern times, marsupials used to be only dominant in Australia. Then when the British eventually colonized Australia, they brought dogs and cows and horses and pigs, and the marsupials started to disappear. They could not compete with the placentals. I have to say that due to the hard, good efforts, noble efforts of the Australian government, they have enacted laws to protect the marsupials. So, bottom line is, the Mesozoic era, we had different um, examples of these different mammals, but please don't forget that the Mesozoic era, which is 245 million years ago to 65 million years ago, was dominated by dinosaurs, not mammals. It was only the demise of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago that allowed for the mammals to rise and fill all of the ecological niches of the world. Another way of saying it is, and the placentals would be the most dominant and successful because of this placenta. So, when the dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous period, which is also the end of the Mesozoic era, opportunity knocked for the mammals to evolve, that means to change, to fill all of the ecological niches of the world. So, prior to 65 million years ago, the predators, the niche of big predator was already occupied by somebody else. It was occupied by the theropods, like Tyrannosaurus rex and Allosaurus. So there was no way for the mammals to evolve to fill that ecological niche. The big herbivores were dominated by ornithopods, Pachycephalosaurs, Cephalosaurus, and Ankylosaurs. And therefore, mammals could not evolve to fill that niche either. During the Mesozoic, they filled a very limited and niche in the biological world. They were mostly nocturnal. That means they slept during the day and hunted at night. They lived in constant fear of the dinosaurs. They would lay eggs, so they were still somewhat primitive. Maybe some of the placentals came out and marsupials evolved at the end of the Mesozoic, but it wasn't until after the dinosaurs became extinct then the mammals could evolve to fill the myriad of ecological niches that we see them today, including the predator, the big herbivores, like hippopotamus and cows and bison, deer. The big predators include wolves and bears and lions and tigers. For some reason, the Wizard of Oz is in my head. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! Anyway, humans and monkeys and apes. All of these mammals evolved only because the dinosaurs disappeared. So, during the Mesozoic, it wasn't clear as to who would dominate in the mammalian world. The marsupials and placentals fought it out for survival, and South America was an island during the Mesozoic era. South America was separated from North America during the entire Mesozoic. Another way of saying it is Central America did not exist during the Mesozoic. There was no Panama, Guatemala, Costa Rica. These countries, that land did not exist yet. And the placentals dominated in North America. So imagine this in your mind's eye. In North America, the placental mammals would dominate, and in South America, the marsupials would dominate. And since they were separated, they didn't come into contact with one another. And I know this is going beyond into the Cenozoic era, but I'll just mention that 3 million years ago, that's when North America and South America collided to form Central America. And at that time, 3 million years ago, then the placentals could migrate down south, and the marsupials could migrate up north. The migration of the North American placentals, things like saber-toothed cats and cave bears and dire wolves, they wiped out the marsupials of South America. So it didn't take too long. just about 1,000,000 years for the marsupials to disappear from South America. But in the south, there was also an invasion of the north by the marsupials. The marsupials could not compete with the placentals because of the handicap of the mother being encumbered by all of these babies she had to carry around in a pouch. And the other possible reason why the marsupials were at a disadvantage is because in nature, for mammals, there is something called the mothering instinct, which we all know about. All mammals, the mothers try to protect their young. With all mammals, the mothering instinct is something unique to mammals. But there's also something called the fathering instinct. I'm sure you all have fathers, and most fathers care about their children, and so there is such a thing called a fathering instinct. And the fathering instinct, however, is weaker than the mothering instinct for most mammals. You do see penguins, but those are birds, and they have a little bit of a fathering instinct. But mostly, fathering instinct is only found in mammals, and in the more intelligent and advanced mammals, such as apes, monkeys, and humans. You do see it to a lesser extent in dogs. I didn't know that there was a fathering instinct for dogs, but I've seen it happen several times. It's one time I had a friend, and the mother had gave birth to a litter of 6 pups. The father didn't really have too much to do with the pups, but the mother got ran over, and the father started to try and feed the pups and take care of them. So there seems to be some sort of weak fathering instinct. And another time, living here in Oak Ridge, I saw the fathering instinct. I had a dog, and it was the same kind of dog I have today. It's called a Spitz. I don't know if you've ever seen a dog like this before, but it looks like this. This is what my dog, every dog I've owned looks like this. It's called a Spitz. Anyway, when I moved here to Tennessee, I brought my Spitz with me from Minnesota, where I had moved from, where I used to teach. And her name was Beauty. And she was in our backyard. And at that time, my kids, I was divorced, and my kids came and lived with me every summer. And one day, my daughter said, Sam's this little tiny dog, really like it's a dachshund that lives about 200 yards up the street. She says, Sam is jumping on Beauty. Beauty's a female dog, and Sam is a male dog. And at the time, I thought, well, I don't really care, because Sam is so small and Beauty's so big. I just thought, well, Sam can't reach that target. But not unfortunately, but later on, my dog was pregnant, and Beauty gave birth to the strangest looking dog I've ever seen. It looks like a dachshund with long white hair, and we called her Égoutier. Anyway, which is a French name. Anyway, so Sam had obviously gotten Beauty pregnant, and Beauty gave birth to just this one dog, Égoutier, and Sam had the fathering instinct. Sam was a really smart dog. He would dig underneath the chain link fence, no matter what they did, and he would come and visit his daughter. And Beauty would try and bark and chase Sam away, but Sam was like, I've got my visitation rights, and I'm going to take them. And he would actually take his daughter and walk her up the street and walk her back. It's the most strangest thing. So dogs can have a fathering instinct. Anyway, what does this have to do with anything? Well, marsupials, it appears, do not have the fathering instinct. So not only is the mother vulnerable to attack, carrying all these babies in a pouch, the fathers don't do anything to protect the mothers. That's another reason why placentals won the battle, I think. So we talked about the fact that during the Triassic period, so don't forget there's 3 periods of the Mesozoic. First one's the Triassic, then the Jurassic, then the Cretaceous. But during the Triassic period, we talked about the fact that Pangea had just come together. And when it came together, climates became dry. We had deserts, and the formation of these deserts at the beginning of the Triassic period led to the original success of the dinosaurs, because the dinosaurs did not need to drink as much water. They excreted less in their feces, and they didn't need to drink as much. Therefore, they had an advantage over other reptiles and large amphibians which were attached to the water. And so the dinosaurs thrived in this dry environment. But by Jurassic time and Cretaceous time, we had a much moister climate. And this moister climate was produced by the fragmentation of Pangaea, by the pulling apart of Pangaea into separate continents. And that allowed for ocean currents to reestablish themselves. And the world was dominated, the plant world was dominated by gymnosperms. Angiosperms made an appearance. Most of these herbivore dinosaurs, which are all the dinosaurs except for the theropods, they preferred to eat fern leaves, which were very tender, and that was their primary food source. A sauropod, for example, could eat a ton every day. A ton, 2,000 pounds of vegetation a day. Last thing I want to talk about for chapter 15 is the mass extinction that resulted in the extinction of the dinosaurs, and it occurred 65 million years ago. 65 million years ago, at the very end of the Cretaceous, at the KT boundary. What is the KT boundary? KT boundary. Well, K in geology stands for the Cretaceous, and T, which is the last period of the Mesozoic Era, the Cretaceous period, and T stands for the Tertiary period, which is the first period of the Cenozoic Era. So the boundary between the two, the KT boundary, is the boundary between the Mesozoic Era and the Cenozoic Era. Another way of saying it is, the KT boundary is the boundary between the world of dinosaurs, which are in the rocks below the KT boundary, and the world of no dinosaurs, which are the rocks above the KT boundary. So almost every geologist realized that the only way we're going to figure out as to what caused the death of the dinosaurs is we're going to have to study the KT boundary. Let's take a look at it for a moment. Okay, so here you can see the KT boundary. This geologist here, he's pointing at the KT boundary. All the rocks here above, right here, are Cenozoic. All the rocks down here are Mesozoic era rocks. You will not find a single dinosaur above the KT boundary. Not a single one survived. And the person who figured out, almost all geologists believe that we now know why the dinosaurs became extinct. That's the beauty of geology. When a great new theory comes into being, and you see all the data just indicating that is the reason. And let's talk about this person. His name is Walter Alvarez, an American geologist. And here you can see Walter Alvarez, who was a professor at UC Berkeley at the time, and this is his father, Luis Alvarez. Well, Luis Alvarez won the Nobel Prize in physics, so he was a famous scientist by himself, but his son is equally famous. And while on vacation with his wife, he went to a place called Gubbio, Italy, to look at the KT boundary. And here you can see it, where I think he put a coin right there. You can see this is the KT boundary. So this line here is the exact time when the dinosaurs became extinct. And he wondered, what is in this dark blackish brown layer? And he found that at the KT boundary in Gubbio, Italy, that iridium, iridium, which is a rare earth element on the periodic table, it's IR, was in very high concentrations. Look at this. Here's the rocks going up to the KT boundary. Iridium is very rare. I'm sure you've never heard of iridium. It's so rare. There's only 2 places on planet Earth where we find iridium concentrations high. That is, and those places are places where asteroids or meteorites or comets, extraterrestrial rocks, have struck our planet. If you look at meteorite craters, that's where you find iridium. The second place where we find high iridium concentrations is where we've dropped atomic weapons. You can find it at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and places that where the Soviets, the Americans, the British, China, France, wherever they've dropped atomic weapons for tests, atomic weapons tests, there you find high iridium concentrations. Now look right here at the KT boundary. Look how high these iridium concentrations are. Much higher at that one point. So Walter Alvarez realized quickly what he had discovered. The reason for the extinction of the dinosaurs. Only 2 things could have caused this high iridium concentrations, he realized. And we don't think any humans were living on Earth 65 million years ago dropping atomic weapons. Therefore, there must have been a large asteroid or a comet that struck our planet 65 million years ago. Now, when he came up with his hypothesis, which was called the impact hypothesis in 1980, scientists did not just accept this new hypothesis. Scientists are the most skeptical people you will ever meet. They're most conservative. And rightly so, because we don't want to just jump onto this new exciting hypothesis without testing. And that's what people demanded. More evidence. So, more evidence started to pour through. The next thing that Alvarez found was Tectites. Tektites. And Tectites are these little glass, and here you can see actual ones, right, at the KT boundary. These little glass. Okay, imagine that when you wake up in the morning, and imagine that you had a bowl of milk, and you poured milk in it, and then from a distance of about a foot, then you'd see little milk droplets go out in a circle around the place where the milk was entering into the milk bowl, right? That's exactly what happens when a meteorite strikes. You make these little glass nodules, which are hollow, and these are called Tectites. He found Tectites at the KT boundary. Another clear sign of evidence that is where the impact occurred due to a meteorite. Then an American geologist by the name of Glenn Penfield, working for Pemex, PEMEX, which is the Mexican National Oil Company. So they have socialized a government-controlled company, which is called Pemex. He was working for them, and he discovered the actual crater, because that was really what would convince people. If they found the actual crater, from 65 million years ago. He searched all around for oil and natural gas because that's what he was looking for. But he was surprised he found the crater. And let me show you where it is. The crater was predicted to be 160 to 220 kilometers in diameter. And so that was a tall order to find that crater. And boom, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. We found the crater right here off of the Yucatan Peninsula. And it's called the Chicxulub crater. Chicxulub. It's exactly the right size, and it hit exactly 65 million years ago. More evidence started to pour in. Around the Chicxulub crater, obviously we found lots of these Tectites. They made a tidal wave in the Gulf of Mexico because the asteroid hit at an angle, pushing the water north and and causing a tidal wave which caused chunks of rock from the sea floor to be washed ashore on Texas and Louisiana. We could find them exactly 65 million years ago. We also find shocked quartz. Shocked quartz looks like this. It's a special type of quartz. Shocked quartz is a special type of quartz. This is what it looks like under a microscope. Normal quartz under a microscope, which quartz is one of the most common minerals. And if you take physical geology this summer, we'll look at all these minerals, and it'll be a lot of fun because we'll actually do it in person. This is what quartz looks like under a microscope. It's dark gray to light gray in color. And when you rotate the stage, it changes. So it's 50 shades of gray. Anyway, but this type of quartz, which is called coesite, is different because look at all the bright colors in there and these lines in there. Those lines are from an impact that could have only been produced by an atomic bomb or a meteorite or an asteroid, meteorite, or a comet. So we got the shocked quartz. We have the iridium. We have all of these rocks that were thrown up onto the shore of Louisiana and Texas from the tidal wave. We have the actual impact crater. People started to realize that it must have been a meteorite impact. Then we did the next thing, line of evidence that in the 80s that showed that the impact is the reason why the dinosaurs became extinct. And it's a valid theory. Is that prior to 1980, some dinosaur paleontologists believed that the dinosaurs died of disease, and that's why they died out, because the mammals were resistant to whatever disease that was. Well, if the disease hypothesis is correct, then the dinosaurs should have died out slowly, and then they met their final end 65 million years ago. If the dinosaurs died out from an extraterrestrial impact, an asteroid or a comet or a meteorite, then you should see the dinosaurs doing just fine to the very end, and then boom, they're wiped out almost instantaneously. Well, some Canadian and American geologists, a team, did a dinosaur census, and they figured out that the dinosaurs indeed were wiped out instantaneously, not slowly. So the disease hypothesis does not make any sense. All of the evidence indicates that 65 million years ago, a meteorite wiped out the dinosaurs, and there is where it struck. Okay, let's start a little bit on chapter 16, and then we'll call it quits until the next video. The Cenozoic Era goes from 65 million years ago till today. And don't get confused by Paleogene and Neogene. Here you can see that some geologists, instead of using tertiary, which is from 65 million years ago till 2.6 million years ago, they divide it into two parts, the Paleogene and the Neogene. To make it easier on you, we're just going to use the terms. So a Cenozoic Era goes from 65 million years ago till now. What era are we living in? The Cenozoic Era, otherwise known as the Age of the Mammals. Well, we could divide it into the Paleogene, the Neogene, and the Quaternary, but most geologists just divide it into these two. So we're going to use these periods, which most geologists use, the Quaternary and the Tertiary periods. And the Tertiary period is the first period of the Mesozoic, and it goes from 65 million years ago to 2.6 million years ago. The Quaternary period goes from 2.6 million years ago till now. So we're living in the Quaternary period. You should also note that some people use these terms instead for the first 62.4 million years of the Cenozoic Era. So Cenozoic rocks do not have dinosaurs. Let's take a look and see how the planet looked. First, this shows you what the planet looked like during the Mesozoic, the previous era. You can see that by the end of the Cretaceous period, at the end of the Mesozoic era, the planet is starting to look more like planet Earth today, but it's not the same, is it? Pangaea had broken apart. Pangaea came together 245 million years ago, and by Cretaceous time, at the end of the Mesozoic, this is what planet Earth looked like. We have our modern day continents: North America, Europe and Asia, otherwise known as Eurasia, South America, Africa, India, and Australia. Now, India is now part of Eurasia, but during the Mesozoic era, India was an island. India will move north until about 10 million years ago. It will collide with Eurasia, making the Himalayan mountains. The Himalayan mountains are a suture zone, a continental convergent plate boundary. Australia during the Mesozoic was way farther south. It was just barely detached from Antarctica. And you can see North America and South America are separated. There's no Central America yet. That would not occur until 3 million years ago. During the Cretaceous period, there were an interior seaway called the Cretaceous Interior Seaway divided North America into two islands, an eastern and a western island. Notice the Atlantic Ocean was not as wide during the Mesozoic era. And then you had this large seaway here dividing southern Europe from northern Europe. And that seaway is called the Tethys Sea. The Tethys Sea would eventually become, as northern Europe and southern Europe and Africa move towards each other, eventually all that will be left of the old Tethys Sea. All that's left of it is what we now call the Mediterranean Sea, which is a remnant of the old Tethys Sea. And the Tethys Ocean is here. So Tethys Sea and the Tethys Ocean are different. Let's now take a look at the Cenozoic era, which is the era we're now talking about. You can see that Okay, this is during the Miocene and Eocene epochs. And a lot of people got it right on, and we know the difference between an eon, an era, a period, and an epoch, right? Well, we divide the Cenozoic Era into the Tertiary and the Quaternary period, right? We talked about that. But we also divide the eras further down into epochs. These are the epochs of the Cenozoic Era. The first one is the Paleocene, followed by the Eocene, the Oligocene, the Miocene, the Pliocene, the Pleistocene, and the epoch that we're now living in, called the Holocene. I know it's too much for you to memorize all of this, but you should know that the Pleistocene is from 2.6 million years ago till 13,700 years ago. You should know that because we'll be talking about that. The Pleistocene epoch is what most people who are not geologists call the Ice Age. Actually, I'm sorry, not 10,700 years ago. I need more coffee. Anyway, the Pleistocene is when the Earth was very cold, and we'll talk about that. 10,700 years ago, the modern epoch we live in, the Holocene, began. And that's also when people started to form larger communities and would start to farm and do animal husbandry, raise animals for slaughter instead of being hunter-gatherers, which we'll talk about later on. So you could see that during the Eocene and Miocene epochs, it's almost looking like modern day, the modern position of the continents. And what does this mean? Cenozoic orogenic belts. Well, in your mind, you should know the Cenozoic is an era, not a period, and it's from 65 million years ago to today. Orogenic is Latin, and that means mountains. So Cenozoic mountain belts that were formed over the last 65 million years. And the main one is the Alps and the Himalayas. The Alps and the Himalayas are very young mountains. How can you tell the difference between a young mountain range and an old mountain range? Well, old mountain ranges like the Appalachians are rounded and have gentle slopes, whereas if you go to the Himalayas or the Alps, the mountains are tall and jagged. They haven't had time to be worn down, and these were formed during the Cenozoic Era. So when you go to Europe and you go to places like Austria or Spain or France, Switzerland, you'll see these tall, rugged, young Cenozoic mountains, otherwise known as the Alps. How did the Alps form? Well, all mountain ranges form the same way. They form at plate boundaries due to subduction. There's subduction occurring under the Mediterranean Sea, underneath southern Europe, and that's pushing up the rocks and folding the rocks, forming the Alps. The other thing, and the last thing we're going to talk about in this video, is India. India is a beautiful country. I've always wanted to visit India. Growing up in New Jersey, I have made a lot of friends who are Indian American. Their parents were from India, but they were born and raised in Jersey like me. And some are from Rajasthan and I had others from around Mumbai who were. Anyway, they tell me a lot about the Himalayas, which are beautiful mountains up in the north in the Kashmir area. This is India 71 million years ago, and you can see it was an island. By 55 million years ago, it had moved north quite a bit. 10 million years ago, India collided with Eurasia, forming the Himalayan mountains, which are a suture zone. They're a continental convergent plate boundary, so that India was attached to Eurasia. And also, not only were the Himalayan mountains pushed up, but the Tibetan plateau immediately to the north was also formed by the collision between India and Eurasia 10 million years ago. Look at the Himalayan mountains. They're beautiful. Notice how tall, and they're the tallest mountains in the world. Why? So that the fact that they're tall and rugged like this tells you immediately, as a geologist, that these are very young mountains. 10 million years old is very young. Here you can see the Himalayan mountains, which stride Pakistan, India, and China. So we'll call it quits for now, and I'll make another video for you later.